What's up, History Peeps? Today we're going to go over Black history from 1861 to 1865. So the start and the end of the American Civil War in relation to Black relations. So the first thing we have on the list is the Civil War cause. So is it about slavery? Is it about something else? So on one hand, it's about keeping the Union together, according to Abraham Lincoln. But for Black activists such as Frederick Douglass, it's about ending slavery once and for all. You have to remember that Lincoln is a free soiler. He doesn't want slavery to end entirely, at least not yet. He just doesn't want it to continue. So a free soiler is someone that doesn't want slavery to continue because it's inconvenient for the white yeoman farmer. If slavery progresses westward, then that means that all the rich plantation owners are going to have all the good land, and that's not going to jive very well with the common people. And so that kind of goes against that American dream, so to speak, 1800s style. There are some border states, so Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, Maryland, and Lincoln doesn't want to lose these states, and West Virginia eventually. Lincoln doesn't want to lose these states because if he loses, especially Maryland, the Confederacy is going to surround the nation's capital. So he's got to keep those border states in line, which explains why he doesn't come out real quick and end slavery. Lincoln changes with time, and that's the great thing about history. People change, they alter over time. In terms of some other things, ending the illegal slave trade, people had engaged in the illegal importation of slavery since 1808, but Nathaniel Gordon is going to actually be executed for it. So Lincoln is sending a statement that we're not going to allow this to continue anymore. We also allow England to search our ships, which if you remember anything about the War of 1812, we really didn't like England stopping our ships. But now we say, look, we'll let you do that. That way we know that no more slaves are being brought in and we're not creating more tension to this issue. He's also going to outlaw slavery once and for all in Washington, D.C. The Compromise of 1850 said that slave trade was abolished in Washington, D.C., but not the practice of slavery. Well, now finally Lincoln's going to issue slavery done once and for all in Washington, D.C., and as well as the new territories that the U.S. will acquire. All right, as some wartime measures here, we have a bunch of things. Ultimately, you need to know that it eventually leads to the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Contraband Act, basically what you have is you have at Fort Monroe slaves start showing up, and then the Union doesn't know what to do with them. Do we free them? Do we not? And so Benjamin Butler is going to put them to work, and he's not going to free them, but they're going to be considered the property of the Union. The First Confiscation Act very much goes along with that. It also allows blacks to kind of serve for all practical purposes for the Union. An act prohibiting the return of slaves basically does exactly what it says. It says that slaves, if they come to the Union lines, are not going to be allowed to return to the Confederacy. So the slaves are seen as property at this time, not really as people, at least legally, by many. The Second Confiscation Act basically gives the South a choice. You can either you can either stop fighting this war now, or we can we're going to permanently start freeing your slaves. So basically it's the Emancipation Proclamation before the Emancipation Proclamation. And then the Militia Act actually says that blacks can have weapons. In some cases they can start helping with the Union Army. And so it's a very, very powerful thing. So you go from blacks being considered property, no ability to have weapons, to something very, very different. Now the Emancipation Proclamation, you need to know that Lincoln goes back and forth on this issue several times. Whenever the war first breaks out, John C. Fremont is going to issue the Fremont Proclamation of Missouri, where he frees all the slaves. And Lincoln says, you need to take that back because you're going to anger the border state of Missouri. Essentially, Lincoln is going to issue the emancipation after the Battle of Antietam. It sees that it's a bloodbath, and so it's really to create awareness and turn the war into a moral cause, because the enlistment had been going down, and now it's to end this war once and for all. And we're going to make it a moral crusade, and we're going to have a new birth of freedom eventually with the Gettysburg Address. He does offer, once he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, it's in September, and he offers to take it back if the South gives up and ends the war now. So you can see Lincoln saying, I'm going to free the slaves, but then if you come back, you can keep your slaves until 1900. Of course, the South does not, and the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863 becomes the law of the land. But keep in mind, it doesn't free all the slaves. It just frees the slaves in the South, sort of. It frees slaves only in Confederate-held areas. So if the Union was there, those slaves aren't free. In the North, those slaves aren't free. In border states, those slaves aren't free. So the only thing that frees all the slaves is going to be the 13th Amendment. But this is the prelude to that. So it only frees slaves in the South that are in Confederate-held territories. Very important to remember because people mess that up, and sometimes those people happen to be history teachers. Anyhow, Gettysburg Address, obviously it's after the Battle of Gettysburg, 51,000 casualties. Lee is going to try to invade the North, Pennsylvania. This is going to be going against his own strategy, and so he never does this again. And it's really just a matter of time before the war is going to draw to a close. It's 1863, there's lots of battles, lots of carnage ahead, but really this is the high tide of the Confederacy. Lincoln gives this speech to honor the dead, and basically the big part of it is that this new birth of freedom, the nation will have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall now perish from the earth. Okay, in terms of other issues, everyone always thinks that, oh, the North, and they loved freedom and everything, but that's not entirely the case. The North is complex too. Racism resides in the South, but it also rears its ugly head in the North. And so basically you could get out of Lincoln issues the first draft. And so you could get out of the draft if you paid $300. So rich people like Teddy Roosevelt's father are offering, to pay that because people sometimes have family on both sides. But if you're a poor Irish person, especially in New York, you can't get out of that. And so what the Irish predominantly see as, if this war becomes about freeing the slave, then eventually when this war is over, they're going to take my job. And so what you start having is an attack on the drafting office, an attack on blacks during the New York City draft riot. So it's a very ugly picture, and remember, it's in the North that this is happening. All right, in terms of black soldiers, there's a couple things that you need to remember. Robert Smalls is in Charleston, South Carolina, and he's going to sneak aboard a Confederate boat called the Planter, and he's going to bypass the Confederate blockade by posing as a Confederate officer, and then he's going to later on, be celebrated for this, turn the ship over to the Union, and he's also going to become a member of Congress whenever the war is over. So South Carolina is going to have him in Congress, which is pretty incredible when the war is over. Harriet Tubman, you know that she frees slaves, but what you might not know is she actually served as a spy. She frees a couple hundred slaves herself, and so she is very well known. The Massachusetts 54th is the first black regiment. They're going to be in all kinds of battles, including the Battle of Fort Wagner, the Battle of Fort Pillow, and the Battle of New Market Heights. Fort Wagner, very much carnage, but had it not been for the Massachusetts 54th, that battle could have ended a lot differently, and it could have been even worse. Battle of Fort Pillow is very, very horrible because Nathan Bedford Forrest is there, and he eventually is going to create the Ku Klux Klan. And basically he offers the black soldiers no surrender. Even after some of the black soldiers surrender, basically all the blacks are going to be killed if the Confederacy can get their hands on them. So white soldiers didn't get the same treatment. They were let go, but the black soldiers were massacred. And so that brings you to the Battle of New Market Heights, where later under Benjamin Butler, the guy that's in charge of the first Confiscation Act, they're going to basically win this battle, and the blacks are going to be in the front, and the battle cry is, "Remember Fort Pillow." And so there you have it. For a couple other interesting things to point out, the Union, remember that it's a mixed bag of tricks. They don't really know what to do about slavery itself. At the start of the war, it becomes about, it's about keeping the Union together, and then gradually it changes over time, and not everybody's happy with that. But eventually the blacks will be allowed into the military. And the Confederacy, towards the end of the war, actually starts enlisting blacks into the military as well in exchange for their freedom, which ultimately doesn't happen. Very few actually chose that option. A lot of blacks did serve under the Confederacy, but it was because they were considered property and forced to do so. Last thing that we have up here is Special Field Order number 15. When the war's basically drawing to a close, William Tecumseh Sherman and a couple other members of Lincoln's cabinet are going to go to South Carolina, and they're going to meet with leaders of the black community in a church, and basically they're going to ask, what do you want from us? What do you need from us? And so the black community says, look, all we want is land, and if you give us land, that can give us the opportunity to pay off the debt that we have, so we'll pay for the land, and then it's going to take a couple of generations for this hatred against blacks to go away. And so William Tecumseh Sherman is going to issue Special Field Order number 15. So the famous battle cry from that people start going around saying is 40 acres and a mule. But don't get so used to this, because it's not going to last forever. Reconstruction has some very ups and a lot of downs that come along with it. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Black history from 1861 through 1865. Have a good day. May the force be with you.